The term adapting the modules has become fairly problematic, hasn't it? Because I can't imagine a scenario where someone's not doing some adapting. Either the time is an issue, or we don't have that one book, or this term also, adopting with fidelity, kind of a problem. I think if we just extended it just a little bit and said adopting with fidelity to the Common Core, everybody would get it, right? So that's really what we want. We want to make sure that as people use the modules with actual human children, that the changes that they make maintain fidelity with the Common Core. So that's what the session's about. And it is about planning. It's one of the other things that I've seen is that teachers who are just like a day ahead of the kids, they're struggling because they're not quite sure of the big picture. And they find themselves, we're way behind, or I'm not quite sure what's going on, or and they can't recover then. So what we want to do is set people up ahead of time to think about, well, what's going to happen in this module, and what do I want to be thinking about that going into it. So do be thinking about structures and time for people to spend together to really dig into the unit plan level and really look ahead and see what's coming and anticipate what their kids are going to be needing. Welcome. Don't hesitate to come all the way down and join the table. So planning. Planning is everything as far as I'm concerned in terms of rolling this stuff out. So our learning targets for this session are these. We're going to be looking at a method of planning and adopting module lessons, and this is the key, in ways that maintain their alignment to the Common Core and the shifts. That's what matters. That matters much more than maintaining what's on the page from Expeditionary Learning, okay? And the target is I can effectively use protocols to give and receive constructive feedback for high quality adaptation. So we said yesterday the time for protocols is before you have an emergency. And having this culture of using protocols in place is going to be helpful in terms of helping people feel trust in this process. But even this, rolling this out, could be part of building that collaborative culture. And so just to get us warmed up, I'd love for you to have a little conversation at your table about what does the term quality adaptations of the modules mean to you now, before we get started? So what would a quality adaptation look like? Go ahead and have a conversation about that at your table. So I'm actually going to ask you just to hold your thinking on where you're at with quality adaptation at this time. We're going to revisit that question at the end of the session. It'll be interesting to see how, if at all, your thinking has grown or shifted. And so could you do me a favor? We've been working with some of you for a year and a half now, and I know you've seen these norms for collaboration 100 times, but the norms are really the basis of this. Some of us who were meeting just before this meeting were reflecting on how scary this particular protocol can be for the person who's doing the presenting. And it's going to be scary for us just because we're not together every day. But when you're in a school community that is agreed to norms, and you already have a basis for the way we talk to each other, this can really catch on pretty quickly and start to feel like a very safe and effective process, what we're going to do. But the norms really matter. So can you just go back to the norms? They're right at the beginning of your notebook, maybe page 2 or 3. You did that Likert scale on yourself yesterday, which I'm sure probably made you smile. It makes me smile every time. And just reconnect with where you think you're growing, where your stretch points are. And tell folks at your table what you're working on. What do you do great? What are you offering to the team in terms of good communication? And what are you kind of monitoring yourself for as we move through this session? You're going to take these cards and you're going to sort these cards into 3 categories. And the first category is, if I made this change, it would maintain the module's alignment to the Common Core. All right, so you read the change and you think, would that maintain the alignment? If it does, put it in that pile. Another option is, if I made this change, it would negatively impact the alignment to the Common Core. I want to say one thing about that category. It doesn't mean you'd never do it. It doesn't mean kids might not need it sometimes. It's just if you make that particular choice, you're moving away maybe from what's been recommended by the shifts or what's been recommended by the Common Core. So it doesn't say never do it. It just says if you make this choice, you've made that choice, okay? And then there's a pile of unsure. I actually hope you come up with some where you're just not sure, because what that leads to is, well, what questions would we have to ask about that to know if that is going to go one way or the other, right? Some of these are going to jump right out. You're going to hear Kate Gerson's voice in your head, you know. You're going to be like, yeah, we can't do that. But others you can probably grapple with, and I want you to, okay? So take 8 minutes to sort into those 3 piles. Go ahead. If you go in your notebook, your participants' notebooks, to page 175, you will see my brain. I own the fact that I'm the one who made these calls about these cards. So here's an answer key to the sort. So I want to give you some time to check your thinking against my thinking, and then for sure we'll raise questions out of that, okay? So just go ahead and see how you did against what I was thinking about. Read those rationales, and then we'll have some conversation. Okay, so you can see the power that would come out of this before even attempting to do some adaptation to the modules. Having this kind of conversation that almost presumes we are going to do some, but let's be thoughtful about it. Let's really be careful about it. There's also in your notebook on page, I think, 177, kind of a guidelines document. It's 179, sorry. A guidelines document from us. But I feel strongly that doing this sort prior to seeing the guidelines document would give the guidelines a great deal more meaning. So of course you could just pass out the guidelines document, but have people build their background around those recommendations before they go. So let us do a close reading of the guidelines document that starts on page 179. And what I'd like you to do is read it closely. Underline, definitely be thinking about questions that you have about these guidelines. Is there anything here that you don't feel comfortable speaking to, or that you have questions about why we're saying what we're saying in terms of the guidelines? So please dig into that. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes of quiet time for reading, and then we'll answer some questions. Well, what questions does this raise for you?
I am wondering about the definition of quantitative and qualitative complexity factors for the text.
Great. So we did that analysis when we chose the modules. You know, and you often ask us about ones that appear to be qualitatively low. You know, like the first one in 7th grade, A Long Walk to Water. If you just look at the number, it's easy to say, like, why did they start with that book? It's so easy. But when you use I always get this backwards, the qualitative rubrics, and you analyze those texts on the other things besides the Lexile score, you see the richness in them and you realize that they are complex. So if you're replacing texts, I want you to be just as careful. And not just do the simple, here's a Lexile, it's a Lexile, you know, whatever, so I'm going to go find a Lexile whatever, and that's the same level of complexity. Just make sure you do that very thoughtfully and really analyze those texts. It echoes what I said this morning about the text choice being about the hardest bit of work that we did in designing the modules. So you should really be giving a lot of thought to that if you're switching out.
I was doing a workshop with a group of teachers, and I was showing them the pyramid, you know, the reader
the
and the
three-
task,
the three.
the qualitative,
Mhm.
and the quantitative.
Yep.
And I got a lot of questions about why do you even bother with the quantitative?
With the numbers?
Yes.
Yeah, and so here's what I've learned
So
about
how
that.
can I effectively answer that question?
Yeah, and especially I wonder if these were secondary English teachers because, yep. How did I know? So the reason to bother with it is because when you withhold that quantitative factor and don't think about what that measures is a unique vocabulary, length of sentences, things about syntax and things that aren't captured in that other rubric. And so when you look carefully at those numbers, you are really offering kids the opportunity to be exposed to more vocabulary than they would be otherwise and to more complex sentences than they would be otherwise. And that's why that should be the first screen, right? And be looking for texts that offer complexity in vocabulary and sentence complexity. Then think about theme, you know, structures. Other questions that come up from this? Yep.
In doing the task that we just did, and we had to see whether it negatively or
Yep.
positively, okay. There was one that I had
Great.
question about, where it said, read the module assessment aloud to students who may not be able to read the text independently, and it says it negatively impacts students, and I don't completely disagree with that. I'm just wondering how the students with IEPs are addressed.
Yeah. So this is the reason why they made me do this session. That question, exactly. So we had a heated conversation about this last night. So let's be sure about the framing. The framing is, how does it impact its alignment to the Common Core? Now that we have this clarity of the complexity of text to be used at a grade level, when we read assessments aloud, we are ensuring that we won't get data about whether or not the student can read independently text at that level of complexity. That's really all that means. Of course, if you have a child who needs that text read aloud, read it. But then know that the data you're collecting isn't a valid measure of where they are against the expectation at the time. Does that make sense? And teachers make decisions like this all the time, and you should. But then be clear when you take that assessment and look at the data or report the data that you're being realistic about what it's actually telling you. And since we know they can't get the tests read to them at state time, I've been encouraging teachers to do two things with the module assessments. If I would actually see what kids can do unless you know you're putting a kid in a terrible situation. So give it. They're only 20 minutes long, they're not always a full period. And, collect it and look at it. And if you really want to know, well, can they do the skill if it's a simpler text? Make a parallel assessment with a simpler text. And then you have 2 data points for a child at that time, and it's good data to know. Yes, you have the skills, but not at this complexity, or you don't have the skills at all, no matter what I do, or wow, you just really surprised me, good for you, which is always a joy. So I've been encouraging people to in ways that support the kids, as you can see in my very lengthy explanation in the card, to get it out there and see, really start to collect that clear data about kids who aren't reading it at the level expected.
If you're beginning to work in a district that has not looked at the modules or used the modules, and you're not beginning that work until, after the first of the year, do you begin with Module 1? My question is because I know that there are a lot of protocols and practices in Module 1 that carry on.
Yep.
Their question is, but if we're moving kids and we want them to get closer to the expectations of the exam, don't we want them to be reading more complex texts? So your advice.
Yep, so, and this comes up a lot. And so I always say this, the modules were written in an order, and they presume that kids know what came in Module 1 and Module 2, whatever. But it's not the law, right? So if you, for whatever reason, want to make that choice, well, it's almost the third quarter, let's get into the third module, then a careful reading of that module, an understanding of what the module expects from kids, and if you feel like, gee, we didn't do anything about that, and this is really going to hit kids hard, do some scaffolding lessons to get ready for it, right? There absolutely is no reason why people can't make these choices. The coaching in these documents is make them really super thoughtfully.
So just talk to me a little bit about that, because I understand in this scenario, we're talking about starting the module mid-year, and we may or may not have been doing Common Core aligned things leading up to it, but the scaffolding of the text, I guess, is where I would get a little concerned about that, because I know when we've looked at it, we started with where they were the previous year, we're building up in that complexity.
Yeah.
And I know when we had a few districts do that, it wasn't so much the scaffolding of the skills that kids needed, it was their ability to attack that text.
Yeah. So again, I feel like that your good advice, like, wait, let me tell you what I know about this third module. The text is much more complex than the first, and for them to be making a thoughtful decision about where their kids are at. Oh, really? The text is much more complex? Maybe we should back up. Though this is where all that you've learned from us, for this last year, you're actually guiding quite carefully, I imagine, by exposing what you know about the design of them, but then empowering them with all the information you have to make good choices for themselves. So not a rule. So the next thing we're going to have you experience is the protocol, the tuning protocol, that we're suggesting that, you've had some great conversation, you want to, teachers want to adapt a module, they're getting ready to do some small scale and maybe some wholesale things to change it. And what we would love to be happening in schools is for people to be having really clear, structured conversations about those changes versus just kind of freewheeling and doing the best they can all by themselves. And that's the purpose of this tuning protocol, okay? So we had some volunteers earlier, which I'm so grateful for, and they are going to serve as the role of a presenting teacher. And they're going to present to the table some plans for adapting a module. And then you're going to, as the rest of the table, you're going to use the tuning protocol to give feedback to that presenting teacher about their plans, okay? And I want you to, really pretend that this is a teacher presenting this plan to you and use all your smarts and your good instincts about the choices the teacher's getting ready to make so that you can help them make the choice as well. So what you're going to practice doing at your table is actually having a conversation about this presenting teacher's instructional plan right in front of them, but not addressing them. So at this table, Victor's going to be the presenting teacher, and you're not going to say, oh, Victor, tell me more about, or Victor, why did you, or any of that. These three are going to have a conversation about what they see, what they're thinking about what they see, and he's just going to be writing, just taking notes, and you're going to love it, because he's just going to sit there and take notes. And I'm calling that moment out because it's the hardest point in the protocol, but it's actually the power of the protocol. Because hearing others, wonder about why you're making these choices, and what if you did it this way, and what could happen now, and oh gee, I'm worried about. What you're doing is you're learning from the rest of the group about what really might be going on with your plans. Okay, so here's how it's going to go. For the first minute, don't worry about the groups of 5. We're pretty well set up to just work in table groups here. You do need to call someone out to be a timekeeper and a recorder and a debriefer, but I'll be the facilitator, okay? So now I'm at the top of the chart on page 181. All right, we're doing the 5 minutes of facilitator reviews the tuning protocol. So then the presenter is going to share proposed changes to grade 5, module 2, unit 1, unit plan. And there's specific information they're going to share with you, and you should listen really carefully to that. And then you get to ask questions of the presenter, but only for 5 minutes. And the kinds of questions you're wanting to ask shouldn't be the deep, probing questions that are all about their decision making, because you're going to see their decision making in the documents. But the things you might need to know about the class, like how many kids are in your class? How long have you been teaching the modules? Do you have special education students in your class? Things like that. Things that can be answered sort of in a short answer, okay? And then you're going to take 15 minutes of just silent reading time, and when you flip a couple pages, you'll see a unit plan there that's got it looks like handwriting, it's pretty, written all over it. And here's that teacher's thinking on paper, and here's what that teacher's thinking about changing in the modules. And surely that's going to raise questions for you, and you're going to want to say, well, why are you thinking that? But that's going to be the conversation you have with each other, not with the presenter. So you're going to say, well, I read this adaptation on the second page of the unit plan, and I'm wondering why, and you're going to just say that to each other, okay? And again, the presenter is going to be real quiet. Bold, does not respond or engage in discussion, okay? And then the presenter gets to look at all the notes that that he or she took while you were having your conversation, and synthesize the thinking that they heard at the table. And then they get to say back to the group, well, here's what I learned from you, okay? This doesn't result in you shouldn't do it this way. But the more you do this, the more a community does this, the more tuned they are going to become to alignment to the Common Core, to what does and doesn't sort of, move too far out of the boundaries to be, instructionally effective. It's going to help people sort of move away from, but I really love that book, I really love that project, and bring those things that they love maybe in alignment to the Common Core, just by hearing how people might be making those kinds of suggestions. Okay? So we are going to go on this thing, and I'm going to ask for you to just take a minute at your table to get a recorder who's going to help the presenter take notes, and a timekeeper. Go ahead and do that. And in one more minute, I'm going to give the next direction. So go ahead. Also figure out who at the table is your presenter teacher. Hey, this is supposed to be agonizing and horrible. Please, no fun at tables. You're supposed to be crying by now. Okay. So the next phase, I know, and well, because now I'm so sorry. If the presenter needs to ask questions of you, this can happen in this next phase. So they're now looking at their notes, and they might say back to the table, oh, Sue, can you tell me more about what you were saying about, adding an opinion piece into the animal research report so that, how would that look? Something like that. Again, you're not going to get these obviously could be all-day conversations, but if they become all-day conversations every time, people won't have the time to do the protocol. Right? So what you'll learn to do is prioritize your feedback. And so instead of feeling like, oh, I didn't get to say, you're going to start to say, like, what's really important for me to say right now, I've got 10 minutes. Okay? All right, but in any case, the presenter gets to look back at notes. They get to say things back to you at this point. And the presenter should make some kind of statement, and these guys are ad-libbing right now, so thank them for this, about what they heard and what they intend to do as a result of the conversation they just heard you have. Okay?
When we are attached to the work, it makes it harder to let go, but when it's anchored always toward, how does this align with the standards, and what are you doing with texts and things like that? You're not talking about me per se, but you're talking about, what is best for our kids and anchoring it to the core.
That's great. More reactions. Yeah, thanks, Terry.
I found that not being able to respond really forced me to listen.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes what happens is as soon as that questioning comes out, we start thinking about our response right away without hearing the total comment or question or whatever it is. And then being able to respond in totality, provide an opportunity to both be reflective and then also pull things together in a way that I might not have in sort of a birdshot sort of way.
Yeah, great. Any other presenters have a reflection on the experience for you?
And just writing it down.
Yeah,
While they were saying it, now I have a record.
yeah,
So I can go back and, I could tell them I'll consider changing
that's
this.
right.
I need to go back and see
Yeah.
if that works for me.
Yeah. And some of this is, some of this you're going to hear very strongly. Like when you hear over and over people say, well, if you do all that background building, why do they need to read it closely? That's going to penetrate. And then some of this other stuff, change it, don't change it. If you do change it, make sure you think about this going forward. And what will happen is you'll start to be able to prioritize what's really important. And then we're going to get clearer about what is really okay to just decide on your own, right? And so if you do this enough in your schools or in your buildings or your grade levels, you'll get tuned to each other. You'll get more tuned to the core. You'll feel stronger about what's really important to give feedback on and what's not. Other presenter reactions? Thanks, Victor. Here, I got it, Deb.
I don't know if this is going to come up later or I should bring it up now, but we'll give it a shot now. This teacher had trouble with time in the previous year with this module. And some of the adjustments that he wanted to make were in order to find time. Those were the ones that got criticized the most. So the question that came up then in our discussion, so that made me anxious as the presenter, because now, look, what am I supposed to do? I'm putting out suggestions for saving time, and those are the things you're telling me are not good because it feels like I'm not hitting some of the standards. Yeah. So our discussion together became about that, but we didn't really come up with a solution.
Okay, so I think it says, during your second teaching of Module 1, you were able to teach module lessons in 55 to 65 minutes 90% of the time. So there are a lot of teachers very anxious about the amount of time the modules are taking. We totally know that. especially from the 3-5 folks who are in their second year, we're hearing, oh, it's just so much better this time. So think about everything we always have known about implementation of something new. It takes time. So I'm afraid that people have moved too quickly to, I have to start abandoning stuff in here, or I don't have time to teach the standards, which is a horrifying thought. And I think just give people permission to watch the kids. When it gets to be too much for them, wrap it up. Like, that's the answer to the time question this year. But don't make a decision about the whole of the module until you've been through it more than once. One teacher said to me, she said to her department, I love this, is a great moment, she was like, don't you remember when we instituted everyday math and we called it all-day math? And I was like, oh, thank God you said that, right? So it's just a reminding that it's going to take time. It's going to be messy this first time. But the other side of that coin is people have been writing to me and saying, what do you suggest that I skip? And they hate my answer because I say, I don't know your kids and I can't possibly from out here tell you what to skip. So please look at the standards, look at the lessons, think about what your kids do know, don't know. You got to be informed and make your own decisions that you can feel as best you can about them this year. This is change. This is what we're grappling with.
Like, time is completely an element here, like to really do a deep read of what it is, especially because I wasn't familiar with what it was that we were doing. I felt like having it ahead of time would help me be able to give more constructive feedback or questioning.
So thanks for that. And so we're finding we do this tuning protocol ourselves in Expeditionary Learning, both for curriculum and facilitation plans like what we share with you. We share them ahead of time on Google Docs. People mark them all up with comments, So take the reading time out of the room. People come ready to go. That changes some of the activity. You also know some of the staffs you work with. Sometimes when you ask for those things ahead of time, it doesn't get done. So do the best you can with the time that you have.
And if we were going to do this with our teachers, how they would need some help in thinking about how to offer criticism in a way that doesn't make someone defensive, but that can be constructive.
Yep. And we were kind of giggling about the I wonders are really your criticisms, but actually that makes it, learning to frame that stuff in that language is going to make it okay for people to start to do this with each other. It's just like the kids. Like, we don't have a good culture or vocabulary in our schools about giving each other feedback, if we do it all. And so we get trapped in the good job, and the very kind of feedback that we know doesn't change kids' learning isn't changing teachers' learning. So doing this literally as it's written, anonymous, have somebody pretend and practice it and videotape it and watch it and say, this was a helpful comment, this was a helpful comment, this was. Don't say that nonsense about all that end of the stuff anymore. You know what I mean? Just like we would teach protocols to kids, teach them to the grown-ups. That it can happen. You can grow this culture that makes this safe.
I'm thinking about the overwhelming feedback, and I'm thinking about working with students and when you're revising their work, and how we've been told by the experts only focus on one or two things at a time. And I'm thinking how powerful this would be instead of throwing everything at the teachers like this. Maybe let's look at this particular thing, this particular time.
Yeah.
And then over time, build on it so they're not feeling overwhelmed, like, wow, I really suck at it, I need to get a new job. Isn't that what you had just mentioned? Yes. So maybe just looking at one thing at a time might be useful at the beginning.
That's great. Yep. Let's just talk about text this time. Let's just look at the text-dependent questions. My personal opinion is the text choices are just the most critical aspect of this. So if you do no tuning on instructional, day-to-day instructional plans, but do tuning around what kids are reading, you're probably going to move really far, really fast, just around that. And just from what I hear in the field, that seems to be one of the barriers. I love this book, and I can't give it up. So tuning around why. Is probably a powerful move. One of the module assessment things to think about is how can we use, what's a central text and what's a related text, and how can we use different texts in different ways, and do we have the things we need to do close reading? Doesn't mean we get rid of everything else. It just means we use those things in different ways. Does that make sense? So I talk often about The Hunger Games, which I think is an awesome, awesome book. Love it. Think every kid should read it. They walk around, they're like, The Hunger Games is me. But I don't want to spend the precious 40 minutes that I might have in the classroom, teaching it when I could be teaching something else. That's right, and they're going to read the Hunger Games no matter what I do. But I do want to walk around and say, here's the Hunger Games, God, you should read this book, it's so awesome, we'll write a blog about it, okay? Yeah, I know you did, right? Yep, we're going to spend time together on this, but I really want to hear what you're doing with the Hunger Games, okay, you guys? Great. Get them in kids' hands. No more books on the bookshelves. Just pass those out. That's sort of my dream. Okay, let's just take a few minutes for a wrap up. We've given you a lot to think about. I'd love for you to do a little journaling about, I used to think, but now I think. I'd love to hear a few things out for the end of NTI, and then we will close up and get you on the road. Okay, so I used to think, but now I think, and then I'd love to hear some closing thoughts from you. I used to think, but now I think. Anybody? 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 Thanks.
I used to think I didn't have a way to help teachers thoughtfully and effectively adapt the modules, and now I have a tool to use.
A nice modeling. All right, another I used to think, but now I think.
I used to think the norms of collaboration were already explicit, but now I see how deep we can go with the norms.
I used to think that adaptation could get really messy and unproductive, but now I think there's a way of actually doing it very purposefully that would move our students forward.
Great. It's probably going to be messy, but it will be productive. So, great.
But now I think what a blessing that I didn't have that constant contact, because I was able to be present here and really think about what was going on and not worry about putting out fires back at the district.
Thank you always. We really enjoyed this time with you. We will see you very soon. Thanks for the blue cards, and take care. Travel safely.